In this age of ubiquitous digital entertainment, so pervasive is its consumption, especially by the young. Thus, how refreshing it was to watch a young girl walk up to her mother at Michael's craft store the other day and to ask, "Mom, can I get this bracelet making kit?" "No," said the mother. "You have enough of these kinds of kits at home already." "Yeah, but these, look at all the colors, Mom." "You already have plenty of colors at home." "Yeah, but Mom." And on went the argument, upon which I could no longer so conspicuously eavesdrop as to arouse suspicion. So I pushed my cart in the direction of my shopping. However, the saga proved ongoing time and again when our shopping would bring us in close vicinity. At one point, I could hear the young girl on the phone with her dad. "I want to sell the bracelets to my classmates. I'll pay you back." Then around the aisle, I heard her make the plea, "Look, Ma, it's on sale." So as I finally moved into the checkout lane, and this woman and her daughter were in the next one over, I had to sneak a peek into her cart. And to see, in fact, if the bracelet making kit was in the cart. Much to my delight, there it was. All of this young girl's pleading, all of her nagging, all of her cajoling, her persistence. She had gotten what she wanted. Keep at it. Keep positive. I have a friend who sells office copiers, and he came across a colleague who was incredibly successful at it, a guy named Larry Tate. This is a copier salesman who this is like a commission job. He makes $500,000 a year selling copiers. And so my friend recorded an interview with Larry. This was before podcasts, and he put it on cassette tapes, and he gave it to other people who were in sales so they could be in awe and perhaps even emulate Larry's keen system. Larry Tate begins his day at 3 in the morning. He has young kids, says it's the only time he can get quiet enough to organize what he needs to organize for the day. He's got a file on every business in his territory that would even be remotely interested in buying a copy machine. Every morning, Larry goes through a sizable chunk of that list. He updates his notes. He searches the computer to make sure phone numbers and contact names are still up to date before he puts all of this information in order, as he will call on him later that day. By 7:30, he's in the shower. By 8 o'clock, boom, that phone is going at his house. He can begin those first phone calls at 8. He's got a prescribed, systematic script that's well memorized that he uses to qualify every one of his calls. And he will continue with those calls all day long until 4 in the afternoon. And that's when he makes time for his family. He has dinner with his family, watches a little TV, gets the kids to bed, because he's in bed pretty early here at 3 in the morning. His system is the envy of all of his coworkers because he's consistently the top salesperson in the entire company. As we all know, salespeople routinely hear the word no 10 times before they hear the word yes, perhaps even more than that. That does not keep Larry Tate down. He counts the number of no's. Oh, good, I'm getting closer to the one yes. Reminds me of that famous founder of IBM, Thomas Watson, who said this: "You want to double your success rate? Double your failure rate." Right? Keep at it. Keep positive. Keep at it. Keep positive. Next week, we'll welcome a little more than a dozen new friends we've made here at St. David's over the last year. One new member, I had the pleasure, I had lunch with her recently. She's been at Church Corps for years, and she found herself looking for a new faith family. And she stopped by St. David's. She signed our guest book after one of our worship services. Everybody who signs our guest book, we send them a note, we send them an email, maybe sometimes a phone call if we think it's important. Your church's newcomer committee prays for everybody who signs our book, and that they would find their faith family wherever they're looking, and that God will draw near to them as they search for a church. Very often we make follow-up calls, maybe they're weeks, maybe months after somebody signed the book, just to check in with people. So when I had lunch with this new friend, I asked her why she joined St. David's of all the churches she visited. And she said that of all the churches she visited, ours was the most persistent and consistent in reaching out to her and welcoming her. And she really appreciated that. While our church sends many more notes and letters than the number of people who join us each year, we continue to reach out and welcome people simply because we think that's what God's called us to do. You guys are the ones who put up that window right there. Go ye into all the world. We're not supposed to sit around. We're supposed to go. And we're supposed to realize that God brings people here because God's got some plan. And so we're just going to do our part and be welcoming and kind to people. We feel like we're doing God's work of love and hospitality. Keep at it. Stay positive. Keep at it. Stay positive. During gold rush days in the dry windswept town in California, there was a young man named Jeremy. And he came to town to strike his fortune. He staked his claim. He decided he needed, though, in this claim that he had staked, which was a big plot of land, he needed water. So he needed to dig a well. And so he got a shovel and began digging, and he dug about 25 feet down. And he paused in discouragement when a passerby said, "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood. You're digging in the wrong spot. You need to dig in that part of your land." He bound to hit water there quickly. Encouraged, Jeremy went over to that spot, and he began digging. Hours later, he was about 25 feet deep, still no water. Once again, saddened by his progress, he took a break when an elderly gentleman walking by welcomed him to the neighborhood, said, "It looks like you're digging a well." "Well, that's not the right place. You're gonna have to dig over there. And I guarantee you dig there, you will find torrents of water." So Jeremy began digging a third time, again 25 feet, coming up short. He took another break. He was hanging his head in discouragement. And that's when another passerby stopped and he struck up a conversation. He said, "Water is really plentiful in this area. But you usually have to dig about 75 feet down." Meaning that if Jeremy hadn't jumped around digging 3 holes that were 25 feet deep, he'd be drinking out of his canteen by now. Keep at it. Stay positive. Keep at it. Stay positive. At this point, I think the preacher can begin to ease up on the stories of perseverance and optimism that all come to mind as you and I contemplate this parable that we have this morning, which you see. Did you see your bulletin covers? It's an old woodcut, I think is what it is. It's kind of a way to help us see what an unjust judge might look like when he's got a persistent widow to battle. Now, if this is a confusing parable to you, it may be because you do as I tend to do, which is to equate any authority figure that we read in the parables with God. Oh, vineyard owner must be God. Farm manager must be God. Rich man must be God. And in this case, of course, a judge. But one of the distinctions that you and I note in the writings of St. Luke is that he likes to lift up the lowly and bring down the lofty. Sound like the Magnificat that we read earlier in chapter 1. This is what we see here when we see an unjust judge, not to be confused with God, who only does his job in order to get rid of some pesky widow. Keep at it. Stay positive. This is the theme of this parable and this sermon, because how many of us need some encouragement today? Generally, in the lives we brought into church today, we could use some encouragement. And specifically in prayer, to quote St. Luke, our necessity, our need to pray always. Not long ago, researchers asked people to name their favorite room in the house. What's your favorite room in the house? What do you think was the favorite room? George? The reading room. The reading room. Okay. I asked the chef, thinking I'd get a different answer. It was no doubt, it was the kitchen. It was the kitchen.
My second guess.
Your second guess. When he's not reading, he's cooking. Among men, if you ask men, it's the bedroom. If you ask mothers of young children, guess what it is? Yeah, I heard it first, the bathroom. You're exactly right, it's the bathroom. Why is it the bathroom for children of young mothers? Because mom can slip in and lock the door. And she can have just a few quiet, short minutes of peace and solitude. No kids, no husband. Just a little quiet time to regroup, to recharge, to remember priorities and purpose. And isn't that what we talk about when we think about prayer? It is in these places and these moments when we can rediscover ourselves, why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing. I think that's, in essence, prayer. And that's why Jesus tells us that we need to pray. We need to make room for God. It's because we need a little quiet time to regroup, to recharge, to remember our priorities, our purpose. And prayer, of course, is the Christian's fuel. talk to God, and contemplate the Lord's voice in our lives. We all need fuel. We all look around us for things to keep us going. What's keeping you going? Jesus wants to remind us the best fuel is prayer. This is what we are to look to keep us going. What do I mean by prayer? What does this look like in your life and in my life? Is it a quiet cup of coffee at sunrise? Is it a few moments to darken the screen of our computers and do a couple of breathing exercises? Is it locking ourselves in the bathroom? Is it yoga? Is it a walk? Is it a few moments at bedtime to think about 3 things for which we're grateful? We all need fuel. We all need things to keep us going. And I'm wondering if this parable doesn't come to you and me this morning, because God is asking us about our prayer lives and how we connect with God. I was with some friends the other day who asked, do you pray the daily office? Of course, the daily office is found in our prayer book, and it's the morning, sometimes noon, evening, sometimes compline, that we might pray in our lives. And it's very regimented, it has readings and so and so. And they were pretty shocked. And I said, well, I don't. They said, what do you mean you don't? You're a priest, you've been a priest 20 years. And I said, that's the problem. You do anything for 20 years, it's going to become rote. And you're going to lose the sense of newness. And so I said, I do a different way. I have a different way of praying and putting scripture and putting meditation and gratitude and all these things in my life. And I invite you to do the same. If it's getting too rote to you, if it's getting too monotonous, what might God be inviting you to look into as your type of prayer? What prayer makes sense to you? Coupled with prayer is this encouragement Jesus gives us in our gospel this morning to stay positive, to stay optimistic, to hold on to hope. And when I look at the crux of the gospel is really hope. It's the bringing to the world of God's sense that nothing is impossible. You thought, feeding people was hard? You thought healing people was hard? Why don't I just raise somebody from the dead after like 3 days? Okay, that's hard, right? And God says that no matter what you and I are facing, be hopeful, because something just might happen. You might experience resurrection. What is it in our lives, I think this text asks us, that we're like not hopeful about? That'll never change. I can't see that happening. But that God might be saying, look, be hopeful about it. And I tell you, either God does one of two. When I'm sick, God does 2 things. God heals me, or God gives me the strength to get through it. And in most challenges in our lives, I find that to be the case across the board. God will take it away and fix it, or God will give us the strength to get through it. Historian and author Howard Zinn says this: to be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it's going to destroy our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, friends, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of the world into a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. Why? Because the future is always a succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, that in itself is a marvelous victory. As we had our young people here from Oxford High School packing up bags for our gun buyback next weekend, these kids have been through this tragedy of the shooting at their school, their friends, and even hurt or killed. And they formed this little nonprofit. And one of the things they did was come to our church yesterday to pack these bags. And we sat down and talked and had a snack and a donut afterward. And I asked them about why they do what they do. And they vocalized their frustration. Our sheriff won't do it. Why back up where we are? Nobody's listening to us. There's so much going on. And it's so frustrating. And I pointed out this quote. You know what? The future is an infinite succession of presents. Your tiny little work becomes a snowball downhill. Every nice little thing that you do this week, every good decision that you make, every next right step that you and I make is part of that infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live is to do so in defiance of all that is bad around us and our own marvelous victory. To be hopeful is to trust that God has a purpose for the world. It is to believe that the goodness, the magnificence, the compassion, the sacrifice, the courage, and the kindness that we see around us is an expression of that purpose. And when we are hopeful, you and I reflect that belief. When we're hopeful, we spread that belief. When we're hopeful, we bring more of God's kingdom into this one. Friends, in times like this, when the temptation to quit and harbor discouragement meet us at every corner, let us heed the message of the Master to keep at it and to stay positive. Where are you being tempted to quit in your life this morning? How is God inviting you to be persistent? Where is discouragement meeting you today? And how is God asking you to be hopeful? May God's voice become our inner voice all week long, reminding us to keep at it and stay positive. Amen.